Well, thank you guys for joining me today. Today I'll be presenting on my research under the REI project. I was a co-author of a co-learning plan where I focused on equitable economic development and its impact for us as a community, and strategies and tools for EDOs, economic development organizations, to utilize to help bolster equitable development in their space. So to start off here, my name is Tony Willis. I am the Chief Equity Development Officer for LEAP, which is the Lansing Economic Area Partnership. I'm also founder of Willis Worldwide Consulting. This is another part of my role and expansion is, well, outside my role at LEAP, this is an expansion of me to doing more economic development consulting work for other communities as well in this space. I'm the lead author for this program, but also enlisted help of one of my good friends and fellow economic development practitioners, Ciso Jaja. He's the founder of Lansing Art Business. Our lab is the acronym LAB for that space, and he has background in working with entrepreneurs as well as underrepresented communities directly, mostly with Black and Latin, our Latinx communities in that space. So between the two of us, we engaged this project, and it was based upon a lot of research. And then Ciso led the interview portion of the program to make it get the anecdotal information as well. So let's start off with what is equitable development. So equitable economic development unlocks the full potential of the local economy by dismantling barriers and expanding opportunities to low-income individuals and communities of color. Through accountable public action investment, it grows quality jobs, increases entrepreneurship, ownership, as well as wealth. The result is a stronger, more competitive economy. That we have these barriers dismantled, people are able to participate in a way that they weren't before. And then being thoughtful that knowing the history that a lot of these barriers have been systematically oppressed on people or built over time, and you have to be conscious and intentional to help dismantle these types of barriers in this space. That's how a true economy works. Because just investment alone doesn't mean everybody in the region benefits from that investment. There are the haves, the have-nots. Equitable development is making sure that we create those pathways where everybody can share in the resource and the wealth in that space. So now knowing what equitable economic development is, the biggest question is, why does it matter, right? So this number here, yeah, with a lot of zeros, that is $16 trillion. This amount is how much the U.S. economy has lost due to discrimination. So Citigroup put out a report in 2020. From their report, they came up with this figure. And this $16 trillion is not just how much the U.S. economy lost due to discrimination against all races or all different genders or demographics. This is only the loss towards discrimination towards Black people. And this isn't the quantifiable loss since the inception of the nation. This is just over the last 25 years. So think about that. Over $16 trillion the U.S. economy has lost. And how do they get this figure? Through a number of areas. First being the both predatory and biased lending practices that took place. Redlining being one of the biggest culprits. Also, when it comes to financing businesses, Black businesses were historically not financed at the rate of their white counterparts. Actually, at a fraction of the rate of their white counterparts, which led to a oppression of growth on those businesses. They were not able to grow because they weren't getting access to the capital to make and meet demand as their white counterparts were. Then you look at discrimination when it comes to education, getting into colleges. We know that's been a big thing in the past. It still is in universities as well. Also discrimination when it comes to careers, access to jobs. And they look at it as they took all those different measures and say, what would that account for in actual dollars? And 16 trillion is the figure in that space. So, not to paint the all gloom and doom, but Another study here, this study was by the McKinsey and Company, and this is 1.5 trillion is how much we can see in GDP increase year over year if we start to dismantle discrimination and really try to tackle the wealth gap, the racial wealth gap in this nation. Knowing that all those factors, what cause harm, the biggest way they're hurting people is by not allowing those individuals to get the wealth, and especially when it came to property or land ownership. There's a historical context that black folks weren't allowed to own land. And a lot of groups weren't allowed to own land as well, but black people specifically in this space. And or even when it comes to redlining housing, your housing rolling to buy properties in certain areas, and those areas were not expected to grow in value as other communities were. So, but by addressing this wealth gap, we can see an increase to our GDP of 1.5 trillion starting within the next 4 years here if we start addressing it. So through this co-learning plan, we interviewed 5 organizations here. We interviewed CISO, my colleague who I mentioned earlier, interviewed myself representing LEAP. We also interviewed Ann Arbor Spark, which is another EDO, the Flint Genesee Group, which is a EDO and a chamber as well. They're like a super EDO. The Partnership for Southern Equity is an organization that does equitable development work across 4 states in the South. And then GRAB, the Grand Rapids Area Black Businesses, is an organization, nonprofit, focused on black economic empowerment. Also EDO to a degree, but more centralized and local for a certain demographic. So the idea here was to have conversations and fix questions to see how are EDOs looking at equitable development, if they are, through what lens are they looking at if they are, how are they measuring it, what tools, resources, and missions they have when it comes to enhancing and furthering equitable development in their community. And from that, to boil down some best practices that we can share to other EDOs. Because there's always the conversation of how do we get started? Or if it's too hard, is the mountain too steep to summit? But in reality, we know that we can do this. It just takes time and effort, and these organizations to see where their time and effort lies. So through this part here, we have some synopsises from each of the organizations that we interviewed here. The first being Partnership for Southern Equity. We interviewed Christina Cummings, the VP of Operations. For this one here, a few notable quotes in the space. I won't read each one that we go through, but I'd like to highlight here. The work that is being done around racial equity seeks to build community in a way that has never been built before, and to create community that nobody's ever seen, a world without racism. The greatest challenge at times is enduring bureaucracy, inherent to economic development system itself. Trying to do something different or imagine the way the work is done with a system like this can be very paralyzing. And so unlike some of the other EDOs we interviewed, their focus is on equity, it's with their name itself. And so understanding that the basic economic development measures of investment, jobs, those are the 2 macros. But there's beyond that, right? Is it the community impact? Are these jobs well-paying jobs, right? Are they above a living wage in this space? And then when it comes to the silver boxes below here, these are a few of their offerings they do when it comes to engaging as tools or resources for community, for equitable development. So they have community roundtables. They have a system where they engage different groups and organizations and leaders in that space with the community as a whole. So they have roundtables on environmental justice or environmental equity in that space, small business grant development equity, property reuse. They have conversations with local stakeholders about each issue and take their time to digest each one in that space. They also consult to private public organizations or both, or to get those mergers of both together. And then they're a multi-state EDO. So they share best practices from what they do in one state, let's say Georgia, to what they do in Florida or Alabama. They try to say, knowing that the Constitution differs in each one of those are local state constitutions, but in local public body of government as well, but they try to say these things have been applied to one of your neighbors, maybe this can work for you as well. Next up here is Ann Arbor Spark. They're definitely a mighty EDO in the state of Michigan here. They've carved a niche out for being very tech-focused and tech-oriented in that space. Phil Stanchek, the Senior VP and Chief of Staff of the EDO. So our next EDO we interviewed was Ann Arbor Spark. What they focus on here are, as their levels of engagement when it comes to equitable development, are entrepreneurial support. They do a great job when it comes to positioning startup companies to grow. And one of the ways they try to do this with an equitable lens is when it comes to offering jobs. They have a jobs board for those startups. And they highlight that and they try to market those to different diverse communities in that space. They have a DEI training for recruitment. So, like I said, with those startups, they're really geared towards help growing. They also try to make sure those startup founders are going through some DEI training so that knowing these companies are ready to grow, they can look at talent in different pools that are other than themselves. And then lastly, funding. They have a substantial TIF capture for the LDFA, their Local Development Financing Authority, and they support entrepreneurial efforts with funding, and that funding goes to a diverse range of startups as well. So those are some of their key ways of engagement in that space. We interviewed myself, or Cecil interviewed me at LEAP here, and let me read my own quotes, I guess, right? So we know that inequities exist within the community and society as a whole. As economic development professionals, if we are not deliberately working on or working to represent the underrepresented, we're not fully doing our job. It takes courageous leadership to make things happen and go. It takes consistency to make it last and change. So we're a regional EDO. We represent 3 counties, Ingham, Eaton, Clinton. We also have had a contract with the city of Lansing and other contract services for different counties, or more direct services for those counties as well. During this time frame, we developed equitable programs. One of our first ones was our Level Up program, which was focused on, which is built off of a study from Stanford, which showed that from the original PPP or EIDL, the COVID CARES relief funding for businesses, that Black and Brown, Black and Hispanic businesses receive less funding, and based upon a few areas. So we developed a program called Level Up to address those areas to help strengthen those business owners, and that was to help them convert from a DBA to an LLC, to create a operating agreement as well as a chain of custody of assets, so putting things out of their personal name into their business name, helping them with an accounting system, as well as getting all the proper financial documents in order, which were all cited under the Stanford study were areas where those 2 demographics were hurting when compared to their white counterparts, will additionally caused that lack of financing. That plus, most Black and Brown businesses don't have a business banking relationship. They have a personal banking relationship, not a business banking relationship. So we're established that as well. Managerial guidance. So part of my role as EDO here was to provide insight to our management team, our fellow C-suite, as well as to our board of directors. As I mentioned, we are a regional organization. And so with that, we supply guidance to our partners in other counties, as best practices to follow, as well as to give insight on how to deal and navigate through an equitable lens. Following is the Flint Genesee Group. This one here represents the city of Flint as well as the Genesee County. They are a chamber and a EDO and workforce development initiative, agencies all combined in one. For them here, relationships with clients are everything. The clients trust workers to direct them to the right place. Being able to make a good decision in this area depends upon staff having each relationship with clients in order to fully understand their needs on multiple levels. Intentionality and proximity of programming matters. It's about meeting people where they're at. So in our conversation with Tracy and Tyler here from the Flint Genesee Chamber, they were very deliberate about meeting community where they're at. And it's one thing to say my doors are open for anybody. It's another thing to actually go out to where those people are. Going to community centers, going to churches, going to local businesses in areas that you might not be familiar with. That's how you actually deliberately engage the community stakeholders. So they've done that through their community outreach, something to be applauded in that space. Trainings, they're currently doing DI trainings for their staff internally and through some of its members. Not yet community focused, but their trainings are to make sure their staff is educated in DEI in this space, to help them be more equitable in their engagement. And also, they are regional EDO, so they still navigate the bureaucracy of the larger regional partners, knowing that there might be a certain region that has a larger demographic of underrepresented people, and how do you balance that out with your regional charter in that space. Here we are is the Grand Rapids Area Black Businesses, GRAB. Jamil Robinson is the founder and executive director. We have all the solutions. What we don't have is the funding and institutional support. And so GRAB is an organization that's focused on Black business development. And we know that Grand Rapids was in the news in the past. And not to say anything bad about Grand Rapids per se, but there's been articles about how they're one of the worst cities for Black growth and accomplishment in that space. Been noted a few times. And in this space, he says the Tale of Two Cities is replicated in every major city across the United States and has been for some time. So it seems that what's currently being done is working, especially for Black people. So he's saying here is that it's a system. There's a system of haves and has-nots. These things are constructed, and we're just following the protocol of these items here. So our last EDO, the founder, Jamil Robinson. So his notable quotes were, "We have all the solutions. We just don't have the funding, institutional support." So that a lot of the solutions have been evident before. How do we make things more equitable? But what's lacking is the real amount of money and investment and the Black institutions to run these organizations as well. And as well as the institutional support from other pillars in the community, which I took that to heart. Because a lot of times we see people, they say, I want to support Black businesses, or I want to support this development, but their money doesn't go to a Black-led organization. It stays with them. They give out small pieces over time to that. If you want to make system-wide change, allow that organization and that community to have access to said investment or dollar amount and implement that way. The Tale of Two Cities is replicated in every major city across the United States and has been for some time. So it seems what's currently being done is working, especially for Black people. That is that the Tale of Two Cities, the haves and the have-nots, so every community is plugged with that pretty much. There's communities that have prosperity, that are growing, that are aspiring. The other parts that is other side of town is dilapidated, lack of resources, lack of access. And so we're saying here that this must be constructed. This must be a construction, as in this wasn't something that just happened to be. These are things that were put in place for a reason. So what GRAB does very well is promotion. They promote Black businesses in Grand Rapids very well. They promote Black businesses to work with each other to create engagements, advocacy. He's not afraid, and the organization's not afraid to talk up about issues that are hurting the Black community and the Black business community in that space. And then space and programming. So they actually have a physical space. They're building out their next co-working space for GRAB. So it'll be an office space for entrepreneurs
And they had different programs like Grab and Go, which is a morning program where they have breakfast, a takeaway breakfast, and a speaker series. You can grab your stuff, grab information, and go about your day in that space, as well as the Grab pop-up shops and other community events as well. So Jamil is doing phenomenal work uh, in Grand Rapids. So from the conversations, this is some more information we've got from throughout every conversation we had, and some guiding principles. One is to be open to this information. Okay, you have to be open-minded going into conversations when it comes to equitable development and underrepresented communities. Honest, we have to be here their the individuals' truths in the community, and knowing that what you think might not be the truth, and being honest about that. Even your organization or entity probably had a hand in, whether directly or indirectly, some type of propagation of systematic racism in that space. Intentionality and our intentionality is key. You only get inclusivity through intentionality and reaching out to communities, where Flint and Genesee Chamber said so well was about reaching out to communities and going where they're at, and likewise of Grab in that space. So common denominators across all those EDOs, pretty much everybody took, each one of their staff took some type of internal DI staff training across the board as a entry point when it comes to engaging in equitable development, because you have to understand the context of what diversity, equity, inclusion means, especially when dealing with underrepresented or underserved communities in that space. They all looked at diversifying their outreach methods. So whether it's through different communication outlets, looking at different, whether it's online or social medias, if it's through different media outlets, whether it's Black owned, LGBTQ plus, how I'm getting the word communication out there to different communities in about economic development. Make sure they know what's going on, and we can get their voices to engage with us somewhere as well. Very few had specific programs directed for underrepresented groups. You know, Grab had one directed towards the Black demographic. LEAP had one directed towards the Black and Hispanic demographic for our programs. But the other ones didn't have a specific program for an underrepresented group. And knowing that each community has their own hurdles to face, I feel like economic development, we need to make sure that we create and be intentional about those programs. But very few actually have that. Board of directors move at a slower pace. Some of them want to go there, but not everybody is ready to make that step at this point in time. And so whether you're the president or VP, you have somebody who's ready to go, people will still have that political sensitivity about what they want to step in or step out of at that time. Strategies and tools, outreach, representation, policies, and support programs. Outreach, we already talked about this, is very critical here, is the intentionality focus. You have to reach out to communities. There's a myriad of ways to do that, whether it's inviting them in to holding workshops at the community, inviting them into your doors with a specific program, have them speak at your event, so it engages them, they feel ownership, and that's a true invitation to engage with. Policies, internal policies, doing a review of making sure you as an organization, do you have any policies that could be updated or that could be actually exclusionary? Or something part of your language or something your process is stopping you to have engagement with a said demographic or said part of the community, and you're having the ability to go through and have an audit of your policies. It's key as well. Then support programs. We want to talk about the programs that will focus on those key demographics or those underrepresented communities in those spaces. So these are the areas for tools. We'll break these down. So outreach, representation, kind of talked about this already, are the roundtables, workshops within the community and going about that. The next one is diversifying leadership. So create deliberate pathways so that your leadership can be more diverse. So it can be representative of the community that you're serving as a whole. And how can you allow somebody in middle management, make their way up to high levels of management or C-suite in your organization. An ambassador navigator program. So SBA launched a program last year, the Community Navigator Program. TechTown already pretty much has one of this established in Detroit, where they have ambassadors that reach out to different demographics throughout the community, whether those demographics are in the Black community, the Middle Eastern community, LGBTQ+, and make sure that there are folks in different spaces to be and spread the good word of TechTown, to make sure people have access and knowledge to. They support and sponsor events and programs from those communities as well. So it seems very organic in that space. This helps establish that credibility and authenticity with those demographics trying to reach out to. As a good example of this, this is the Partnership for Southern Equity. This is a demonstration of one of their summits or community roundtable events here, where they go into community, talk about whether it's environmental justice, talk about development of brownfields or greenfields in that space and impact. And development must happen with people, not to people, is what Nathaniel Smith is one of his quotables like to say in the space. Happens with people, not to people. Because a lot of times those communities are not aware or not a part of the process where said development will take place, right? So it's happening to them. And they're now just reactionary to what's already been approved, been destined for them. Going into support programs, which is the third area of focus. Targeted technical assistance programmings. LEAP's done this very well when it comes to our Level Up program. We just launched our Elevate program, which are very targeted towards Level Up was for Black and Hispanic, to get them to a place where they can be more bankable and get additional funding or financing those mechanisms from that Stanford study I mentioned earlier. Elevate is also focusing on Black business entrepreneurs, knowing that the unique hurdles that impose upon their business journey as well. So having targeted technical support to fill in the gaps where certain demographics are hurting. A cooperative business model assistance program. So this is a program that I'm following in on with my fellowship moving forward here, is that cooperative economics, especially for underrepresented people, is a way to further grow and have economic prosperity. That there are strength in numbers when it comes to the community. And part of these goals are, a worker owner program where the employees can purchase a business from the owner, and knowing that creates a new pathway for income for those employees and ownership, also diversifies ownership in that community and keeps the business that could have closed down if the business owner didn't have a succession plan in place. This allows them to have a succession plan. Also, a cooperative model is procurement. A lot of businesses can be competition on the retail side of business, but also be collaborators and allies on the procurement side of business. So you think of a number of restaurants that all sell the same good, but they're also buying the same goods as well to produce that. So I always use this as an example. Think of different Mexican restaurants in the space. Because it's true in Lansing, we have a few, not more than a few, but I know a few of them that work collaboratively to buy at a bigger quantity to drive the price down, which allows them to be more profitable. So yeah, me and this restaurant can be selling the same thing, but together we can buy the same chicken, tortilla, beans, and drive the price down as a bigger quantity. At the end of the day, people want options. So now we just have more profit at the end of the day. Solution sourcing. Some of the crowdsourcing is you present an issue to the community that's facing and ask for entrepreneurs to create ideas around that, solutions for that. So if we know that involvement when it comes to community officials, or involvement when it comes to lack of access to water, or lack of access to clean drinking water, or lack of access to energy rates, these are problems communities are facing, or safety. Can we find solutions from an entrepreneurial mindset to source ideas out and vet those? One of the examples of a targeted technical assistance program is One and All that LEAP launched in 2020. This program here is focused on the ALICE demographic. So that's the Asset Limited Income Constrained Employed, ALICE demographic. So we look at Michigan, 40% of Michigan households are at or below ALICE. That number goes up to 60% when we look at Black households in Michigan, and it's around 54% for Hispanic households in Michigan. So this program is launched. It's a cohort-based program. These are some of the faces of our cohort in March 21 year. We take on about 20 entrepreneurs a cohort, and it's an 8-week program where we focus on educational matters. So we look at the business basics of starting a business, marketing, your balance sheet, your budget of what this looks like. Then we pair every individual with a mentor, because not just what you know, it's who you know. And the mentor is typically somebody that has access to a larger social network and social capital, and they have more insight or have been further down that entrepreneurial journey themselves, so they can introduce you and be your confidant into the markets itself. Then lastly, it's capital. Every graduate of the program receives a $2,500 grant for their business, because as I said, these individuals are at or below the ALICE threshold, which means they're economically unstable, that they are vulnerable, it's probably a better way to put it, and that so cash is definitely a need in these spaces. So this is a targeted program. We know that a demographic, ALICE, you're above the poverty limit, but not making enough to really get ahead. 40% of Michiganders are in that area. How can we assist that group? A targeted technical assistance program, and this is an example of that. Oh, I think I went too far. Next up is policies. So look at internal review of organization here. First off, we look at one idea for policy could be recruitment pledge. This is where EDO can propose to its members, the stakeholders, that pledge to purchase X amount of goods. Or sorry, this is similar to our recruitment pledge is when you want to house and try to recruit as many demographics as possible. So knowing that, will I reach out to a HBCU and look for talent through that way? Will I look through certain groups, festivals, communities, and look for talent? And that I should have at least so many people being interviewed of different demographics, not just for quotas, but really being intentional and showing a strategy, because having a strategy and following it leads to the results of a more diverse workforce. A procurement pledge is where you're looking at how much of your spend is going towards underrepresented businesses. If I'm a large organization, am I buying my toiletries from a Black supplier? Am I contracting out janitorial services to this group? Am I buying food from this group? Am I looking at my employee engagement money spend supporting entertainment industries that are owned by underrepresented folks? Where is my money going as an organization to operate? How much of that is going towards underrepresented businesses, stakeholders? An underrepresented steering committee. So a lot of organizations have put different steering committees in place where you empower employees to drive a conversation, as well as drive direction and narrative, and then create processes that can better the organization, the recommendations of processes. So creating a steering committee, whether it's for said or fill in X demographic, whether it's for a Black employee steering committee, whether it's for a woman engagement steering committee, and understanding those individuals that can represent that demographic in the organization, get feedback and apply that to the betterment of the organization as a whole. Developer agreements for EDOs. We can implement certain information or certain language to leverage and hold developers accountable when it comes to a project. That can be having X amount of housing being affordable housing. We're looking at X amount of money should go to streetscape maintenance of the project to make sure if they do a project in your neighborhood that there's actively arts and beauty engaged for that project. You can put a developer agreement where say you want to host, they have to sponsor X festival for X many years or whatever that case may be. but putting something there where the community actually benefits, not just because the building's there. That's great. A building could be anywhere, but what is that building, that developer actually producing for the community? And that's where we can hold people accountable and be very direct on what type of engagements we want as EDOs in that community. An example of one of these policies is 110. It's an initiative where the goal is to hire and promote and advance 1 million Black individuals who do not have a 4-year degree into family-sustaining careers over the next 10 years. So this is both an initiative and a nonprofit where a number of employers have signed on to look at those plans. How do we recruit people, and creating processes internally to give people a job that is family sustaining. So you think that's, what is the other term? It's where it's like you're above the Alice threshold. And the other term escapes me right now, but a family sustaining job over the next 10 years. So if you already, major employers have signed on, you think of Pepsi, Coca-Cola, Amazon, and beyond, what pathways are creating where somebody can come into a job without a 4-year degree and still make enough money to support their families? And I think that amount, a living wage differs, but a family is typically a family of 4 is they're looking at in space. Can you produce enough money at that job for a 4-year degree to sustain your family of 4? It's a great initiative, and it gives out best practices for other organizations to follow. And they also review and train and promote those jobs in those communities as well. So a few final thoughts here. When it comes to equitable development as a whole, and it kind of goes to those guiding principles, you have to be open to the possibilities. Opening to hearing people out that might have information that might be conflicting from you, that your own beliefs are at that point in time. And you have to also understand the historical nature of how things come to be in this space. That's kind of been followed through as a number of our other EDOs have gone through some of DEI training or review in that process, because things weren't just this way because as is, these are byproducts of systems in place. And then additionally, or lastly, I would say, to keep pushing this phrase, intentionality breeds exclusivity or inclusivity. And in that space, to really be intentional is only you get inclusivity. And when you think of the best EDOs out there, you have to put this as a measure on your door, on your list of how am I going to make sure that our programs and policies are benefiting these members of this community, are reaching out to this part of this community, whether geographic representation, racial, religious, gender representation, and beyond in those spaces. That's where we need to make sure that we have measures in place, at least conversation at the bare minimum, to know that, are we really reaching everybody that we should be reaching in that space? And the goal here is, once again, to make a more competitive and more prosperous community for all. And with that, I just want to thank you all for your time. I appreciate you all. If you have any questions, feel free to let me know. We'll go from there.